Imagine for a second that you could open a text thousands of years old, bypass the historical narratives and the apocalyptic visions, and extract a highly optimized, biologically superior meal plan. Sounds a bit like science fiction, right? But what if I told you that the Ethiopian biblical Canon, one of the oldest, most expansive, and most meticulously preserved collections of sacred texts on the planet, holds the exact ingredients for a modern culinary revolution? Today, we are taking ancient scriptures and turning them into a high-level intelligence report on human optimization.
It really is a fascinating thought experiment. When people think of ancient religious texts, they usually think of moral frameworks, laws, or historical accounts. They rarely look at them as an agricultural or nutritional database. But the Ethiopian Orthodox Canon is unique. It includes books like Enoch and Jubilees, preserving detailed references to ancient diets, grains, and herbs that have survived millennia. We are talking about foods that fueled ancient empires, sustained ascetics in the unforgiving desert, and provided the absolute baseline for human survival in extreme environments.
Exactly. And that is exactly what we are digging into today. We are going to construct modern, step-by-step meals using exclusively those ancient ingredients outlined in these texts. Then, we are going to put on our analyst hats and run an intelligence report on what this specific diet does to the human machine mentally, physically, and even symbolically. Though, I think we both agree right out of the gate that, while a plate of ancient grains might heal the gut and power the brain, the only true spiritual meal is the word of the Almighty. Everything else is just fuel for the physical vessel.
Absolutely. That is the fundamental baseline. The food sustains the body so the mind can comprehend the word. That is the hierarchy of existence. You cannot eat your way to salvation or enlightenment, but you can certainly eat your way to a clearer mind and a stronger body. So, if we are treating this as a culinary intelligence briefing, where do we start with the menu? Let us talk about how we bring antiquity into a modern kitchen.
Let us start with breakfast. If I am looking at the ancient Ethiopian landscape and the scriptural references, I am seeing barley, teff, honey, and perhaps some early forms of flaxseed. How do we modernize that into something you would see in a high-end, contemporary culinary setting?
I would construct a toasted teff and barley porridge, but we elevate the technique. Step 1. You take raw teff grains, which are the size of poppy seeds, but pack more calcium and iron than almost any other grain, and you toast them in a dry pan until they start popping. It gives off this incredible, rich, nutty aroma. Step 2. You simmer the toasted teff slowly with cracked ancient barley in pure spring water. You stir it continuously until it reaches a creamy, luxurious, risotto-like consistency. Step 3. Instead of using refined modern sugar, you fold in raw, unfiltered wild honey. Add a pinch of ancient rock salt to balance the sweetness, and top it with heavily crushed flax seeds for texture. You have just created a modern superfood bowl, but every single ingredient was available to the ancient patriarchs.
That actually sounds incredible. It is incredibly simple, but the nutrient density is off the charts. Teff alone is a nutritional powerhouse. What about lunch? We need something robust to keep the energy levels stable. The scriptures often mention lentils, bitter herbs, and unleavened breads as daily staples.
For lunch, we execute a deconstructed lentil and bitter herb salad served with injera crisps. Step 1. You slow cook brown lentils with crushed garlic and onions, absolute staples of the ancient Middle Eastern and East African diet. You cook them until they are tender but still hold their shape. Step 2. You take bitter herbs, think wild dandelion greens, chicory, or mustard greens, and you lightly massage them with cold-pressed oil and a touch of citrus to break down the harsh cellular walls. Step 3. You serve the warm, earthy lentils over the raw, sharp, bitter greens, and you scoop it all up with baked, crispy shards of injera, which is the traditional fermented teff flatbread. It is a textural masterpiece. Crunchy, earthy, slightly bitter, and deeply savory.
I love the deliberate contrast there. The bitterness of the herbs historically symbolizes hardship or slavery in biblical traditions, but culinarily and biologically, it stimulates digestion and liver function. It is a brilliant pairing of meaning and biology. Now, let us move to dinner. The evening meal in ancient times was the anchor of the day, the time for restoration.
For dinner, we are going completely elemental. A slow roasted lamb, since lamb is the ultimate scriptural protein, paired with a puree of ancient root vegetables and a reduction of pomegranate and myrrh. Yes, actual myrrh. Step 1. You marinate a prime cut of lamb in oil, crushed coriander, and coarse sea salt. Then slow roast it over an open flame or in a modern oven until the fat renders and the meat literally falls apart. Step 2. You mash ancient tubers or root vegetables into a thick, rustic puree. Step 3. You create a dark, glossy glaze using reduced pomegranate juice and a microscopic, food-grade trace of myrrh resin. It gives the dish an earthy, almost pine-like, aromatic finish. It is a meal fit for an ancient king, entirely rooted in antiquity.
Wow, pomegranate and myrrh. That sounds like a Michelin-star dish, yet it requires no modern synthetic ingredients. So, we have our menu: the toasted teff porridge, the bitter herb and lentil salad, and the roasted lamb with pomegranate. Now, let us transition into the intelligence report phase. If a biological analyst were looking at the physiological and psychological impact of consuming this specific menu over a sustained period, what are the physical benefits?
From a purely physical standpoint, this diet is a masterclass in metabolic stability. The intelligence report would flag this as a high-endurance, low-inflammation protocol. Teff and barley are complex, slow-burning carbohydrates. They do not spike your blood sugar like modern refined wheat. They provide a steady, sustained release of energy throughout the entire day. The physical endurance of someone eating this way would be exceptional. Furthermore, the high fiber content from the lentils and the fermented nature of the injera crisps create a highly resilient gut microbiome.
And we know definitively now that gut health is directly tied to the immune system. So you are looking at a physical vessel that is highly resistant to disease, possesses sustained stamina, and completely avoids the lethargy and crashes associated with modern processed diets. What about the mental benefits? How does this specific menu affect cognitive function?
The mental benefits are perhaps the most striking part of this entire report. When you eliminate refined sugars and processed seed oils and replace them with omega-rich flax seeds, mineral-dense teff, and powerful antioxidants from bitter greens and pomegranates, the brain's neuroplasticity thrives. The intelligence report would note a drastic reduction in brain fog. The high levels of B vitamins in the ancient grains and the bioavailable iron in the lentils ensure that the brain is highly oxygenated. You would see improved focus, sharper memory retention, and a much more stable emotional mood.
It is like removing the static from a radio broadcast. The signal just becomes infinitely clearer. That makes perfect sense. If your blood sugar is not crashing every 2 hours, your emotional and mental state remains stoic, calm, and focused. Which brings us to the final and perhaps most nuanced section of our intelligence report: the spiritual aspect. Now, we established earlier that physical food does not grant spiritual enlightenment. The word of the Almighty is the only true spiritual nourishment. But surely there is a symbolic or disciplinary benefit to eating this way.
Absolutely. The spiritual benefit of this diet is not magical. It is deeply disciplinary. When you eat foods that are close to the earth, foods that require time to prepare and mindfulness to consume, you cultivate a state of gratitude. The bitter herbs remind you of human suffering, endurance, and deliverance. The unleavened bread or simple grains remind you of humility and the transient, fragile nature of life. By consuming these meals, you are stripping away modern gluttony and mindless indulgence. You are eating simply to sustain the vessel, which creates a physical discipline that perfectly mirrors spiritual discipline.
That is a profoundly beautiful way to look at it. The food itself is not holy, but the act of eating with intention, humility, and gratitude aligns your physical habits with your spiritual posture. It prepares the body to be a quiet, efficient servant to the mind and spirit. You are not distracted by artificial cravings or digestive discomfort, which means you can actually focus your energy on prayer, meditation, or the deep study of the Word.
Precisely. You are optimizing the hardware so the software can run perfectly without glitching. In a modern world, where our diets are heavily engineered to distract us, to addict us with artificial flavors and instant gratification, returning to this ancient, scriptural blueprint is almost an act of rebellion. It is a conscious, daily choice to say, I will not be controlled by my appetites.
I find it endlessly fascinating how modern science is just now catching up to what was implicitly understood thousands of years ago. We have entire teams of scientists and nutritionists telling us to eat more fermented foods, more ancient grains, more bitter greens, and less processed food. And yet, this exact prescription has been sitting in the Ethiopian biblical texts since antiquity. It really makes you wonder what other profound truths are hiding in plain sight, waiting for us to decode them.
It really does. We often suffer from a sort of chronological snobbery, assuming that because we live in the modern era with advanced technology, we are the absolute apex of knowledge. But when you look at the sophisticated nutritional profile of these ancient meals, you realize our ancestors possessed a deep, empirical understanding of human biology and its intimate connection to the natural world. They knew exactly how to fuel the human machine for maximum resilience.
And maybe that is the ultimate takeaway from our intelligence report today. True optimization isn't about the newest synthetic supplement or the latest fad diet trending on social media. It is about returning to the foundational elements of human existence. It is about recognizing that the body is a vessel, and how we treat that vessel matters immensely. But at the same time, we must keep the hierarchy intact. The finest, most nutritionally perfect meal of teff and roasted lamb will eventually turn to dust, but the truth of the Almighty endures forever.
That is the perfect summary. The physical food keeps you walking on the path. It gives you the strength to put one foot in front of the other. But it is the spiritual word that tells you where the path is actually going. Without the latter, the former is just a well-fed wanderer.
A well-fed wanderer. That is a brilliant, haunting image. It forces us to ask ourselves a very uncomfortable question. Are we just feeding our bodies to wander aimlessly through life, or are we fueling ourselves for a specific, higher purpose? If we take the time to prepare these ancient meals, to slow down and appreciate the raw, unadulterated ingredients of the earth, maybe we also need to take the time to sit quietly and consume these spiritual words that give our lives actual meaning.
And that is the true challenge for all of us living in this hyper-accelerated age, to slow down the chewing and to speed up the listening, to let the ancient wisdom of the earth nourish our physical bodies, and let the eternal wisdom of the Word nourish our souls.
What a powerful note to end on. The next time you sit down for a meal, look at your plate and ask yourself, is this fueling my distractions, or is it preparing me for my ultimate purpose? The ancient blueprint is there. The ingredients are available. The choice of how to use them and what to live for once you are fed is entirely up to you.